Welcome to Dr. Roger and Friends, the bright side of longevity, hosted by 3 Ps in a podcast, Doc Roger, Teresa, and Danielle. Thanks for joining us for coffee and conversation.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Roger Landry, and this is We're All in This Together. And I'm here because we are, right? I'm here with Teresa and Danielle, happy to be, even though we're thousands of miles apart. We come together like this regularly to share some of the skills that we share on our podcast, which is the bright side of longevity. And those skills we feel are very appropriate for these times. At least we hope they are, and we're doing this in order to just help anyone who's maybe going through some challenging times with COVID-19. Those skills varied from public health to coaching to positive psychology, and this is we enjoy doing this to help at least in some way, although we're all shut in, and like most people. And if we can, we're going to do it. So, and we solicit your questions that you may have, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. So if you just send them to us, and we'll be happy to answer. And one of those had to do with some anger issues. For those of us who live in large families, some people live alone. That's a dynamic that in itself is very stressful and strange. But particularly for those who are with others, are showing signs of irritability, anger, getting a little annoyed with things that otherwise they would have overlooked, and they're concerned about that, and we appreciate it. And I think the 3 of us are all going through it. We had a long conversation before we recorded this, and indeed that is happening. We have lost much of our lives, the social part of our lives, the work part of our lives, the employment part of our lives, and it is natural to at some point get some irritability and anger regarding that change. So we're hoping that we can bring a little bit of understanding and some practical tips to deal with it. So let's do that. What do you say?
Let's do it. You know, we are not really taught, I don't think, in any point in our development to how to process any negative feeling. And we don't want to feel uncomfortable. That's kind of our primitive brain in action, keeping us safe. So anger is certainly one of those negative emotions that we don't like, that we don't know how to process, and we sort of try to do away with it almost as a knee-jerk reaction without even noticing it. So, right? And we all do this, and there's nothing wrong with it. So you're feeling angry, but then a bag of Doritos later, and you go, what just happened? So we're so quick to do away with it, or maybe you've reacted, you've yelled at someone. So any sort of immediate knee-jerk reaction, and then later we're trying to figure out what happened, and we're angry at ourselves for being angry. So we're stacking anger on top of anger, and sometimes I refer to it, this is gender specific, but as mean girl. The mean girl in your head that's judging you for getting angry is never going to be a part of the solution. Only if we can distance ourselves from that situation and say, what just happened? Why did it happen? And approach that from a place of love. Can we figure it out so that maybe next time, midway through the bag of Doritos, we can kind of stop and interrupt that, and maybe eventually prevent it. But it starts with understanding it. And also being willing to feel that discomfort of anger or any other negative emotion, and just sort of invite it in, sit with it, and know that it does indeed pass. And having that emotional courage to do that, to sit with a very uncomfortable emotion and not react, respond, fly off the handle, plow through a bag of chips or whatever your go-to. It's like hitting the easy button to escape that emotion. So can we sit with it without reaching for the easy button? And most often the emotion does diminish when we're willing to sit with it. So just some thoughts there. I know, Danielle, you have some really practical tips for us today.
Yeah, thank you. And that's great advice. When people start to unravel anger. As Teresa said, you maybe catch yourself before, a little sooner before you go from 0 to rage, because it happens very quickly. And sometimes people don't even, like Teresa said, what just happened here? Like, I didn't even know I had that in me. So as you do that reflection, you're sitting with the feeling and kind of figuring out what's going on. You might want to look for a few different things. Number one, what are some symptoms that you're feeling? Because maybe if your hands start trembling, you start to feel hot or headachy, you're clenching your jaw. These are all signs that you're getting angry, and you might not even realize you're doing it. And so really paying attention to what's going on in your body, because your body may send you signals before your brain realizes the emotion is there. So that's number one. Number two, notice some triggers. Because for some people, it's the same thing. You know, if you're interrupted, if somebody embarrassed you, if you feel offended in some way, if you think that, you know, maybe you're just overwhelmed by the situation, there's so many things, and you reach your boiling point. So start to notice what sets you off, because when knowing that, you can do some things to curtail it. Some things might include, if you know you're getting angry, just walk away. Do not try to have a rational discussion when you're up here, because it's not going to help anybody. Go exercise. Go, if you need to, talk to a therapist. Just walk away and take a break. And the biggest thing, you know I'm going to say it, is take a few deep breaths to kind of bring yourself back to center. I do want to mention, we don't want to minimize the fact that with people being in quarantine, domestic violence across the globe has escalated. So we've got, if you look at your screen, some resources, particularly in the US, that you can find if you are in a situation and you need help.
So what is the common thing that may be running through here? It's nice to be able to reduce things to a certain one thing or several small things in order so that it doesn't seem so insurmountable. And I think many of us are talking about grief here, because we're all losing something in some way. Certainly our normal lives, certainly close contact with many people, work, a feeling of accomplishing something during the day for many of us, and that's associated with grief. You may not be experiencing it right now as grief as we usually understand it, with tears and that sort of thing, but it is losses that are in all of our lives, but people experience them in different ways. What do you think, Teresa?
Absolutely. And in some cases, you know, people are grieving the loss of a loved one, maybe from this virus, but maybe it's also just a loss of a loved one that happened for another reason and recently. And I think everyone probably needs a hug. Maybe you lost your free time that you used to have. It seems like people are either extremely busy or extremely not busy, and not much in between. So there are a lot of losses. Canceled weddings, graduations not happening, things that can't really be do-overs. Those are significant losses too. So many people dealing with loss. And I often say there's no such thing as the grief Olympics, though, right? Comparing grief, there are no gold medals in grief. So it's I think a little bit tempting to be comparing my losses versus your losses and wanting to get the gold medal, that my losses are bigger than your losses. And that just doesn't serve anybody. Everyone's grieving something, and there's, you know, complete waste of time and energy and brain power to judge someone else's grief as compared to your own. So my sense is we're all grieving something, and it's all okay.
So that's a really good point, Teresa, because, you know, compounded with our grief is our guilt that our grief isn't good enough. Like, oh, I lost a vacation, but they lost a person. I feel bad that,
I shouldn't feel this way. So it's acknowledging that all of our feelings are valid. It's great to have awareness that we are all suffering and it's not just you, but that doesn't mean that your grief is not valid. And one of the things that I like to recommend to people when they're feeling grief is not to run from it and also not to wallow and let it cycle and cycle. So a good middle ground for me that I'm going to offer today is a very brief meditation that you can do. We're not going to do it today, but I'll talk you through it. And so it's just putting your hand on your heart. And some people put their hand on their belly and they'll close their eyes and they'll just check in and think, okay, what am I feeling? I'm grieving. What am I grieving over? And just sit with that feeling for about a minute. And as you do that, you start to notice a little bit of a shift. So you start to draw your awareness to your breathing. You might notice your chest kind of rise and fall. You might notice comfort. To me, it's like I'm giving myself a hug. So if you can't touch somebody, but you put your hand on your heart, it's very comforting. So it gives you a little bit of a break because now you're going from that grief, you've acknowledged it, to this little place of peace for a moment. Sit with it, feel it, and then come out and go about the rest of your day. But just taking that moment can make a huge difference.
Well, we're in a period now where it doesn't matter how old you are, but everyone is experiencing loss. And that loss can be devastating. I mean, we have the loss of life. We have the loss of jobs. And anything we say here can't even touch the kind of challenge that presents, stress, grief. And so we don't want to minimize those things. But talking about other things that people, they're losing some of their freedoms and their security, their favorite pastimes, their control. And I think even our innocence, because in our innocence and maybe our arrogance, we felt we were in much more control of our lives than we're finding out we are. And that is all associated with all kinds of very deep feelings. But those losses can hit us pretty hard. Huh, Danielle?
Yeah. So, and a lot of times people don't necessarily realize that they're going through grief and loss, right? Because this is so different and it's not easily recognizable. So just as kind of a test to anybody listening, in the last 24 hours, have you experienced any or some of the following? Anger, anxiety, aggression, agitation, apathy, loneliness, impatience, wanting to eat too much or suddenly eat too little, wanting to sleep too much or sleep too little, wanting to work all the time and you're an overachiever, or not wanting to do anything. Well, these are all signs that you're going through some type of grief, and it's normal. We're all feeling it to varying degrees. So just a couple of tools that I would like to offer. First, today we are airing the Doc Roger and Friends episode with psychotherapist Jane Parker, and she's phenomenal, and she gives some really good coping tools. She talks a little bit more about anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And she also is forward thinking about some of the things that we can not only do now, but take with us in the future and use it as kind of a learning opportunity. So I highly encourage you. I will make sure there's a link in this video. And second, the last time we spoke about grief, I mentioned a breathing meditation. Well, I've since recorded it, and I will also include a link. So there's a script and the meditation if you'd like to try it yourself. And then last, if you find that you're crying all the time, you're totally withdrawing, that you really are not functioning well, there's a crisistextline.org, and that will connect you with a crisis counselor. So please, if you're at the state of, I can't take it anymore, know that there are resources there to help you.
Good advice, Danielle. There's certainly so much grief, and we may not recognize what we're dealing with as grief, or maybe we do. Grief is such an interesting thing. It alone is isolating. for many people. So we're physical distancing, and so many people are feeling isolated, and that could be due in part to just the grief of grieving all these losses that we're experiencing. I'm a life coach, and I focus on widows, and one thing I've learned is that with grief, there's the feelings that come with the territory that are normal for us to experience, but we can also manufacture even more suffering on top of that if we are not kind to ourselves, and so many of us are not. So be careful, listen into your thoughts, and make sure that you're not beating yourself up, judging yourself, just being unkind to yourself. Make sure that everything you say to yourself is exactly the same level of kindness that you would say to a good friend. Often the answer to that is no. So be very careful there. And would suggest that you do the things that you know are good for you. So taking really good care of yourself during this time. That won't help with the feelings that come with this territory that are unprecedented for all of us, but it will help with any additional suffering that you might be experiencing, which all of it's normal. All of it's normal.
Well, more great advice. There's going to be a new normal when this is all over. There's no way we're going back to our lives the way they were. This is historic, and there will be a new normal, but I'm hoping in the end, from a positive sense, that we go back to our lives, whenever that is, but with a more refined sense of the priorities of our lives. We see that, all things change. The Maasai tribe in Africa, East Africa, all things change is a very fundamental thing of their culture, and as it is with the Buddhists and others. And to the extent that you try to resist change or think that change doesn't happen, well, you suffer for that. But what remains as we lose these many things and hopefully gain them back, or gain them at least partially back, or gain them back in a different way, what remains after this, hopefully, will be our very humanity, the core of what we are.
You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.